Welcome back to Making Money Matter, ladies and gentlemen. Today, we're going to make nickel matter. We're going to make lithium matter. This is our deep dive series with Mr. Rick Rule. Many of you will know Rick. Last month, we did a deep dive into uranium. This month, it's all about those stocks that people are saying, whoa, it's all over, Red Rover. Well, not according to Mr. Rule, who's had many years of experience in this market, and he's a contrarian investor. He's a speculator. He is also, just for all of you out there, because I'll be there, he's running the Rule Investment Symposium in Boca Raton, Florida in July. And I'm telling you, I've been there before. It's fabulous. We've got some Aussie companies over there. I'm going to encourage all the Aussies out there, come on, let's show the Americans how good we are and get over to Rick's conference. And then you can come to my gold conference in August. Rick, great to see you. The deep dive into nickel and lithium.
Let's start it. And let's start it with a curveball.
Okay.
We're going to start talking about nickel and lithium the way that you and I talked about uranium in 2022. You may remember that nobody cared about uranium, or if they did care about uranium, they were hostile to it. People said, why would you invest in uranium? It's gone nowhere. Everybody hates it. Why would I bother? Well, that's precisely why you would bother. You make money in capital-intensive businesses by buying things that are out of favor. Uranium was out of favor. At $20 US a pound, nobody wanted to own uranium. At $100 US a pound, where it doesn't have to go up anymore, everybody wants to own uranium. So now we can talk about other hated commodities. Nickel, as an example. Lithium, as an example. Ask away. Let's do our deep dive.
All right. Well, let's start by one of the things that people probably don't understand, like why nickel is important. It's highly ductile, it's oxidation resistant, it's used in chemical production, infrastructure, building materials, communications. Like there's lots of uses for nickel. The deep dive for me is, Rick, what is nickel? Why do we care?
Remember 4 years ago, nickel became a battery metal. It oddly became sexy. The world was going to go to electric vehicles and all this stuff. And people pointed out that the lithium oxide battery, in terms of weight, was mostly a nickel copper battery. Nickel does have absolutely superb properties with regards to electronics and microelectronics. And it's arguable that the new frontier of nickel has to do with what the scientists call distributed energy storage, which you and I would call batteries. One of the reasons that nickel fell so far is, of course, it rose so high. If you look back 4 years ago, it went from being a decidedly out of favor commodity to, briefly, the rock of the month. And so part of the fall really has had to do with the heights that it's reached. Traditionally, of course, nickel has had lots of other uses as an alloy and as a component in stainless steel. And in fact, the big new production of nickel is coming from lateritic nickel deposits, similar to the ones that you have in Australia. But these are higher grade, mostly in Sulawesi, Indonesia. This is nickel in conjunction with iron or ferronickel. And basically what happens is it's an extremely efficient way of making pig iron, and hence some forms of stainless steel. A lot of the sulfide nickel that used to go into steel production is now being replaced with these laterites.
What's the difference, Rick? When you just said pig iron, for those of us out
pig iron is a substance that you make into a pellet. It's a very crude ferrous compound that you then smelt fairly cheaply and turn into a finished iron product. It is at once simpler and cheaper in terms of making some basic steels, and substantially cheaper in terms of making high-grade things like high-grade stainless steel. It's a consequence really of reducing a concentrate that comes from these laterites, these nickel-rich iron ores that occur in superficial enrichment zones in tropical places, northern Queensland as an example, but much more commonly Mindanao and Sulawesi.
And Mindanao and Sulawesi, what I've been reading is that they're almost flooding the nickel market, and that's what's creating issues, especially down here in Australia, where a lot of companies are saying, we can't produce it, therefore we're out.
That's absolutely true. The lateritic nickel production for steel and stainless steel uses is substantially cheaper than the traditional sulfide nickel that one would find in Kambalda and some of the fantastic sulfide nickel deposits in Australia. The Australians at present simply cannot produce, cannot compete. Don't feel bad. The Canadians can't. Nobody can. The Swedes, nobody can. And one of the reasons that we've seen the nickel price fall, well, there's three reasons we've seen the nickel price fall dramatically, I believe. The first is the incredible increase in production from Sulawesi, and we'll talk about that. The second that most people don't think about is the fact that nickel fell so high, or pardon me, rose so high, it had to fall. If you take a nickel chart over 10 years, from 10 years ago to today, it doesn't look so bad. It's just if you add years 4 or year 5, rising, and then it fell from that rise. The third thing, and many people don't think about this, Carrie, Russians are very big nickel producers. And it just so happens that the Russians need money. The last time that the Russians had a desperate need of money was 1990 and 1991, which coincided with a low in the nickel price, a low in the platinum price, and a low in the palladium price, because the Russians were dishoarding. The Russians sold everything they had in inventory that they could grab cash from. That's happening again. If you talk to nickel traders around the world, what they're finding is that the real source of sulfide nickel, not Indonesian nickel, but sulfide nickel, is, of course, Russian dishoarding. When will this end? Well, sadly, Mr. Putin won't tell me. Despite my repeated questions. But if past is prologue, the dishoarding of the Russians in the early part of the decade, the 90s, lasted about 2 years. It ended when they ran out.
Yeah.
And I suspect, unless the war in Ukraine ends sometime soon, that the dishoarding of nickel, platinum, and palladium by the Russians will run out when, in fact, they run out. I recently flew over southern Sulawesi, not purely to see the nickel operations, but I certainly looked out the window, Carrie. And I have to say, even by my fairly jaded standards, the environmental destruction associated with this lateritic production is horrifying. And my suspicion is, unless you see an investment in the Indonesian nickel business by the likes of, Inco, well, now Vale, or BHP or something like that, as long as the business continues to be controlled by Indonesian/private Chinese interests, there is going to be some problem with regards to otherwise avoidable environmental degradation. My own belief is, as Indonesia becomes more wealthy, that there will be domestic Indonesian pressure and, in fact, international pressure against environmental practices like pushing surface waste across the beach with a bulldozer, no deep water disposal, but rather direct disposal, wrecking reefs, creating many square kilometers of sedimentary waste in coastal saltwater horizons. I mean, what you see is truly scary. And my belief is that you will at least see a hiatus in the increase in Indonesian production within a couple of years. It's expanding very rapidly right now, it being laterite production in Sulawesi, and the reserves are vast. One of the reasons why it's such low cost is because the practices that they're using with regards to mining and the lack of post-mining remediation or reclamation means that their costs are really unreasonably low. One of the reasons that you began to see a creep in rare earth prices was do the same thing. The Chinese looked at the environmental degradation that was happening in Western China as a consequence of their traditional methods of producing rare earths, and so we can't do this anymore. We have to mine more responsibly. And the consequence of their mining more responsibly was that their costs of production went up. This is going to happen in the nickel business. Will it happen soon enough to satisfy punters in Western Australia that own shares in sulfide nickel companies that are off by 3/4? Nope. But that's okay. Your listeners should remember one of my favorite slogans, which is that the cure for low prices is always low prices. And what you're seeing now in nickel is, first of all, nickel being adapted to new uses. nobody finding any reason to conserve nickel by way of more efficient fabrication practices, and sulfide nickel production around the world, but particularly in Australia, getting shut down.
Yeah.
One of the most bullish signs you can possibly see for a market is productive capacity that's idled. It means that the knife of efficiency, if you will, is cut through the flesh, cut through the fat, cut through the muscle, and is now cutting into the bone.
Right.
And that's always the beginning of the end of that bear market. Do I see a recovery? Yeah, probably 2 years from now.
That's
And
that's still quite a way away. And in the meantime, the degradation in Indonesia continues, but China is very happy with this cheap source of supply of nickel. So should investors just be sitting back going, don't touch it for a while? And also for those companies in Australia, do they
I think what investors need to do is they need to do really a deep dive into sulfide nickel producers. They need to begin to build a shopping list.
Okay.
Uh, Nickel is a market that people are afraid of right now.
Mm.
It'll be a market to enter when people hate it. When nickel becomes a four-letter word, and I don't mean a four-letter word like gold, I mean the other four-letter word.
Yeah.
And we're not there yet. We're just not there yet. We've begun the process of shutting in production. All that's happening. We haven't seen massive bankruptcies yet, which we will. And we haven't seen people throw in the towel. Now, I myself, one quasi-nickel stock, an Australian stock, of course, is Centaurus. I don't own it because it's in the nickel business. I own it because it's a massive world-class deposit of something. For me, if I have a deposit that has the potential of 10 billion US dollars in situ reserves and resources that would be in the lowest cost quartile in its commodity, and have best quartile return on capital employed, I don't care if it's a sand deposit, a cement deposit. I don't care. So I don't regard Centaurus myself as a nickel stock. I regard it as a tier one deposit. I'm delighted that it is in nickel, platinum, and palladium because it's causing people to sell it wholesale, which means that a deposit that I already understand and like gets cheaper by the day. One gets rich, Carrie, by buying low and selling high.
Absolutely.
And the fact that the market is giving me the opportunity to buy a world-class deposit that I understand well, that I would happily have bought at higher prices, at progressively lower prices, is something that makes me really, really, really happy. I realize I'm different than many of your listeners. There are fine sulfide nickel deposits in Australia that will be economic, in fact, hyper-economic, again, in the 5-year time frame. And these are deposits that will likely be selling ultimately in terms of their market capitalizations at half discovery cost. These are classics to the extent that you can buy a high quality tier two asset with ultimate all-in sustaining costs at 50% of selling price and returns on capital employed exceeding 25%. You do it, and that's coming to Australia. You're not there yet. Another thing that'll happen, I think, is that intelligent entrepreneurs, maybe a Gina Reinhardt, maybe an Andrew Forrest, will look at things that no longer fit in the South 32 stable or the BHP stable. Say, you know what? I'm going to buy this asset. It's not going to change my decision as to what to have for breakfast. It's going to take 5 years, but I got 5 years left. I'm going to warehouse it. And then when nickel returns to favor, I'm going to take it public again. It's that kind of thinking, of course, that makes them billionaires.
Yeah.
And it might be that it's an Owen Haggerty that does that, and it reappears in public markets as opposed to in private markets. But you're going to see the gradual reorganization of the nickel business. You are going to learn, if you're intelligent, all you can about sulfide nickels now, with the view to investing maybe a little bit early, But during a period of time when the mining magazines in Australia talk about the end of nickel,
Yeah.
as though nobody's ever going to use stainless steel ever again and nobody's ever going to need a battery. This is going to come, Carrie. This is absolutely positively going to come. You and I talked for years laughingly about the uranium market.
We did.
At $8 a pound, nobody cared. At $130 a pound, everybody cared. Uranium fell from $130 a pound back to 20, and nobody cared. They hated it again. Now that it's 100, they love it again. So will be the case with nickel. There
But
will come a time when people truly hate it. I don't mean that they're afraid of it. I don't mean they're bored by it. I mean they hated it. There is no hate as sincere as the hate of a jilted lover. Nickel was very recently the flavor of the month, and the
yeah,
people who thought that their nickel stocks were going to make them 10 baggers, and instead it gave them back 20% of their money, will have a profound hate for it. And those people will contribute to my economic well-being by selling to me far too cheaply.
you said just before that right now is the time people should learn all about the nickel sulfide projects, be it here in Australia or around the world. So what you're saying right now is it's not fully hated, but now is the time to get educated, do your research, get understanding about the nickel market, and then potentially you'll be looking at projects that do have a future rather than just throwing your money out willy-nilly in a spray.
Now, Carrie, for me, I'm going to write some checks later this year.
Excellent.
I have a flaw in my character, meaning that if I anticipate an event and it moves up without me, when it moves off the bottom, I'm too cheap to buy it. I just am. So I can't help myself. So there will be 2 or 3 nickel names that I will buy, understanding that I'm probably a year or 2 early.
Okay.
That's okay with me. There's a flaw in my character. I am better 2 years early than 3 months late, because if I'm 3 months late, I personally won't buy it. I'm not suggesting that your listeners are as dumb or as stubborn as I am. But when I say that you learn in anticipation of writing checks in 2 years, that's doing as I say. What I'm going to do is probably write some checks later this year and continue writing them. So if people pay attention to this interview and then they see that I, bought some shares in, say, Chalice as an example, there's no contradiction in that. There's merely a flaw in my character. I'm always early.
Well, I think Chalice are going to be one of the ones at the symposium in Florida from memory. So
that's correct.
One of the things that people could do is come over to the conference and actually, I know you walk the floor quite a lot, and so they could literally come and not just pick your brain, but see why it is that you like some of these. Are there going to be other nickel companies there that?
Well, Centaurus will certainly be there, and you need to decide for yourself whether that's a nickel company or merely a discovery company.
Right.
I'm in my own mind, as I say, if there was $10 billion in situ value of sand and gravel in a company, economically recoverable, I don't care about the commodity as much as I care about the operating margin and the net present value.
Yeah.
So they certainly will be there, and there may be others. And by the way, when you're talking about following me around the conference floor, this year you'll be able to follow Randy Smallwood,
Oh,
the
great.
head of Wheaton Precious Metals. You'll be able to follow Sean Boyd, the head of Agnico Eagle. Following the head of Agnico Eagle and seeing what booths he stops in front of is a worthwhile exercise. And of course, there's going to be Robert Friedland, a guy who's not by any stretch of the imagination a bad investor. There's going to be a lot of high quality investors there. And in addition to listening to what they have to say from the podium, following them around the exhibit floor, surreptitiously, please, is a wonderful thing to do. And as you know, Carrie, hanging out on the boat cruise and talking to the Jim Rickards and the Daniela DiMartino Booths and the Carrie Stevensons, for that matter, after they've had a couple, and I assure you they will have a couple, is a wonderful way to get unguarded information that you otherwise wouldn't have access to.
Yeah, that's nicely put. Now, Rick, don't have a lot of time left, but one of the things I said at the start was nickel and lithium. I think we've done a bit of a nice deep dive into nickel. So, ladies and gentlemen, do your homework. Don't just be a lazy investor. What Rick's saying is, understand the nickel market. It is not quite hated yet, but it's getting there, and that perhaps Indonesia will be pulled up in their environmental destruction. Let's hope so, and let's hope that the world reacts a little bit quicker than they have in the past. But lithium's not hated as much as nickel at the moment, but you wanted to comment on it. So what's your view?
Yeah, I think the hate is coming in lithium. People who are lithium bulls suggest that it's cheap now because it's off 75% in price. But remember that it was up 550% before it fell 75.
Yeah.
Remember, too, that the world was never short of lithium. The world was short of productive capacity. The world had plenty of rock and plenty of brine lithium. What we didn't have was chemical plants to turn that into something useful. Despite that, we spent a lot of money looking for lithium, and we were spectacularly successful. We found a ton of it, and we spent billions of dollars on it. And the market is going to have to absorb all of those pounds. Remember, too, like the uranium business, at the beginning of the lithium bull market, there were probably 10 or 15 lithium companies. More recently, there were 300.
Crazy.
That means that 250 of them have to go to company heaven, or they have to restyle themselves as uranium companies or gold companies or some other commodity that they know nothing about. Suffice it to say, lithium is going to have to digest massive, massive discoveries. It will do it, but it's going to take some time. And lithium is another subject where what we have is investor boredom, investor fear, and the sort of sense, the hope that after a 75% price decline, that the price is going to reverse. One wonders why the price might reverse with all the discoveries and the billions of dollars that have been put in place to build out these deposits. Remember that we weren't short of lithium to begin with. We were only short of productive capacity. Again, this is a circumstance where I think in the next 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 years, you will be able to buy producing lithium deposits that have cost $1 billion to put in place, and you'll be able to buy them for 200 million, 220 million.
Wow.
This is a circumstance, I think, where you're going to get the opportunity for 3-baggers or 4-baggers in companies that are already cash flow positive, because people are going to look at lithium, they're going to hate lithium, and they're not going to pay attention to the balance sheet and the income statement of the company. Right. They're just going to look at the title of the company, XYZ Lithium, and say, oh, lithium, I don't want to know. Never mind that the I don't want to know is selling at 5 times cash flow in a depressed market. So I use this because I want your listeners to come to understand how money is made in the resource market.
Right.
To say something is hot is a curse. It's a curse. To say something is hated is a blessing. And when you wrap your head around that, when you wrap your head around the fact that arithmetic is more important than narrative, then you begin to make money if you do the work.
You've got to do the work. But one of the things I think I took from that as well for our audience is lithium is abundant. It's everywhere. There's 300 odd companies, probably not that many of them will survive. But if you were going to look at it, you would look at producers more than you would explorers in the future.
We definitely don't need to find any more lithium.
Right.
A world-class deposit of anything that can back out existing producers is worth having. But most of the things that you're seeing now are effectively Me Too lithium.
Yeah.
They're decent-sized deposits. They might be in the middle of the cost curve, but the entire cost curve now is above the selling price of the product. So the fact that you're in the middle part of an uneconomic price curve is not high praise, Carrie.
Yeah, not something to dive into just yet. But again, goes back to what you always say, Rick. Make sure you do your research and don't just throw your money into something that you actually don't know that much about.
And learn to love hate. Absolutely learn to love hate.
All right, final word goes to you, Mr. Rick Rule. What would you like to advise our beautiful audience out there at the moment?
Same as always, no obligation. Go to Rule Investment Media, list your natural resource stocks, and I'll rank them 1 to 10. Expect to be disappointed by your lithium stocks. While you're at the Rule Investment Media, go over to the Rule Classroom. 200
that's a great
hours,
resource.
200 hours of instructional programming there, all for free. Wonderful price. Think about, if you're a speculator, attending the Exploration and Prospect Generators Boot Camp on April 20th.
Yes.
You can watch it from the comfort of your own home, $99 tuition. If you don't think you got your money's worth, email me. Gold-plated money-back guarantee. But most importantly, I want to see everybody at the Natural Resource Investment Symposium, July 7th through 11th in Boca Raton. My preference would be that all of my Australian friends came across the pond and joined me on the boat and consumed beer with me and followed around the conference live. To the extent that that's inconvenient for you, that you can't take that much time out of your life, we'll live stream the conference. You'll be able to attend the conference from the comfort of your own home via your own computer. Whether or not you attend live or live stream, you'll have access to the recordings of the conference for a full year. And you'll need them because we're going to give you more information in 4 days than you can possibly absorb in 4 days, particularly if you take time out for the booze cruise. Whether or not you attend live or live stream, your tuition is fully refundable if you don't believe that the curriculum that we offered up was worth the money that we charged you for it.
Yeah.
Money back guarantee, gold-plated. The financial risk is all mine.
Well, I know you love taking financial risk, but you've been very successful in that, Rick. Next month, we're going to do another deep dive, ladies and gentlemen. Haven't quite worked out which commodity Rick's going to love or hate next month, but we'll bring you more of Rick's deep dives next month. But for now, Rick, fantastic to see you. I look forward to seeing you in person in Boca Raton, but I'll see you next month on Zoom.
Carrie, always a pleasure. I enjoy these conversations. I enjoy speaking vicariously through you to an Australian audience. So thank you for the opportunity.
We love chatting to you. Thanks, Rick.